Right, well that's frustrating. It's immensely frustrating. Bear with me in 2 seconds again. I'm going to go and test it again. So yeah, we'll go next door and we'll test it one more time just to triple check. But I think we might have cracked it. So bear with me 2 seconds. Right, so now I've got it. So again, guys, if you see anything or hear anything that's slightly out of order or odd, then just give me a shout and we'll try and fix it for you. Right, so back to this one. So with a sumo wrestler, we're just trying to finish him off quickly. Being a close frame, the things to look out for in the future, because essentially the glass is right next to the image, is over time the glass itself can glue to it. So the whole idea of a mount or a mat or a passepartout or whatever language you're using, it physically mounts the glass away from the image and obviously stops the glass from drawing it, from gluing to it over time. That gluing mechanism can severely damage your image. So over time, that gluing can cause the paint or the ink to transfer onto the glass, and whenever you try and peel it off, then potentially you're going to damage the image. Obviously, the other advantages of a mount to give it a nice border, and it also helps draw in the eye and just makes it really pop out. It's really nice and special. Camera shifted. Should be able to see a bit better. There we go. So we would always recommend a mount. Obviously, if we recommended something and someone's said, no, I don't want to do it, then we'll take it under advisement, essentially. So just using this lovely little chisel point bridle, just to make a nice indentation. We always try and do it between a third and a quarter of the way up the frame, so that the base sits nicely on the wall and it doesn't hang out too far. Line that out, tuck myself in properly. So I'll just switch over to a thinner Phillips head. Keep peering down the lens because directly behind the lens is the screen with all the chat on it. So if you did want to pop on and ask me any questions, you're more than welcome. So general questions of how would you frame this and what colours would you pick out and that sort of thing. So over the years we've framed all sorts of weird and wonderful things. From sumo wrestlers to wetsuits. That was an interesting one. Wetsuits was quite a tricky proposition because obviously the neoprene is fairly stretchy, and you know when it's not around somebody it looks pretty drab, so we had a few minor issues getting that one filled out correctly essentially. But yeah, we achieved a good look in the end for it. So the other one was similar sort of idea with sort of those type of old-fashioned, I say old-fashioned, they've now been banned, but the type of swimming trunks that they used to use in the Olympics, the ones with the sort of micro shark teeth in them, they were quite difficult to fill out again because of the stretchiness. And same with shirts and things like that. We're finding with an awful lot of, particularly rugby shirts, they're very clingy. And not only are they clingy, but they're also rip-proof. And because they're rip-proof, they're very difficult to actually sew in over a board. So yeah, there's a few sort of minor issues. Anyway, sumo's all finished, all ready to go. I've got a Beatles image to finish off as well. Down. A beautiful old photograph of the Beatles here. It's really quite nice. Lift that up, get that out of the way of the thing. Anyway, so it's a lovely little limited edition. So 14 of 150. So we'll get that all nicely into the frame for you. Show you how that's done. If you do have very special items like this, then we do have specialist glasses which might help as well as specialist mounts. So I think we very briefly showed you those medals which are finally complete. I'll grab those out in a second. After many issues and many different bits of glass with lots of bubbles which are waiting to go back to the rep there, so they can have a word with the manufacturer. Yeah, a bit grumpy about that whole episode. Anyway, I'm sure the customer will be ecstatic that it's all sorted. But regards glass and things like that, we do have UV protection glass, so glass that will block out 99% of UV light and protect it nicely for many years to come. And with the metals, you also saw the anti-reflective properties. So it's basically got rid of 99% of light reflection, allowed in the light and out again. So it's really good glass. This is standard 2mm float glass. Standard 2mm float glass should block out 70% of UV, but you know, UV is an issue not only from windows and that sort of source, but also, you know, traditional lights. So the all the different lights here will kick out some form of UV. I think spots I think LEDs are pretty good at pumping out UV as well. So just be aware of that if you have got something that's really highly sensitive to light. Obviously, if you think about light in terms of the spectrum in the old days, you know, photographic dark rooms, they used to obviously only have red lights in them rather than standard outside lights, because it did affect the chemicals from you know, from the bulbs that were emitting. So you do need to be a little bit wary if you do have something that's very photosensitive, that you do frame it with a good glass. Obviously, if it's highly photosensitive, we'd never recommend you frame it in the first place. But you know, we're talking about things which you want to last hundreds and hundreds of years, things that want to you know, pass on generation to generation. You know, something with a bit of care and quality that you want to look after, then you know, it is a good idea to use these specialist glasses. I will admit that they do cost quite a chunk more, but it is it's worth it just to make sure that you're passing it on to the grandkids or the great-great-grandkids. We'll always advise you from our standpoint of view to keep it for posterity. So just very quickly clean that glass. You can just use a general glass cleaner at home, anything Window Leany or Mr. Muscly or whatever brand you've got locally. Anything with a high alcohol content in it is going to do the trick. We're obviously using well, nil glass, which is designed for glass and mirror. It's just got a good high alcohol content in it. So we've got 3 different types. We've got a Lion branded own, Lion Sheen. We've got the nil glass in. We've also got the extra special stuff for you know, water white glasses and things. But yeah, the good quality cloth is always important to get rid of those smears. Always try and do it in a circular motion. That allows you to get the smears off. And my little trick is always to take it to the edge and look down on it. That helps. If you are doing it for your own personal framing at home, if you're doing a ready-made or something like that, you probably don't need to pay as much attention as a professional picture framer does. But it's always nice not to have any of those smears on the wall. Back for that blow-up. So this is it's just an air gun, simply linked up to a compressor, blows out air just to get rid of any dust and bits and particles which can get in there and well, annoy you. I have to go in. So we're just getting rid of any dust and bits and bobs that are floating about in the atmosphere, on the tables, anything like that. You know, very often we'll have to go back into these 3 or 4 times as we scan it closer and closer with our eyes. So on this Beatles print itself, as you can see, we've just used a lovely white, but it's got a black core edge to it rather than the usual white core. So that does the same idea as a double mount with the black in it, but it's just a nice little thinner line, and that nice thin line essentially is really good with photographs, primarily because it's white on top, but the underlying black core just takes a little bit of the glare of the white as well, which is always quite useful. And that nice thin line gives it that nice little edge. Does look really nice if you double mount it, double edge it as well. Which I'll show you probably next week when we do the triptych of textiles. I think I've left that on my order sheet, but with Christmas fast approaching, we might crunch through it. Either way, I'll try and drag it out if we complete it early. But that nice edging just really sets off the edge of the photograph. This particular photograph doesn't have any signatures or anything written down in terms of limited edition number. Just because the customer likes the look, she's included this centimetre of white all around the inside of it. It's quite effective, but as I said, the only real reason for usually doing it is to have those signatures and things like that in there for limited editions. So you notice whenever I put frames in, I always do it on a V. So that just helps me essentially flip in things a little bit faster. It also protects the frame a little bit whenever you put things in. And we're basically using the base as a hinge. Just makes everything that little bit easier to put in. Stops you from banging things or cracking glass. There you go, that's all nice and in. I put the light in a different place today so I could hang the secondary camera a little bit higher. And, get in the way a little bit. I'll get used to it. Alright. So that's all pinned in. I've gone through the board, just nipping it a little bit into the wood. That just gives the whole board that extra little bit of structure in the frame. The tape also helps just to keep everything as one solid unit as well. So everything here has got more than one purpose. Obviously the tape holding onto the structure is quite useful, but it also stops any air and dust from getting in the side. Airflow is quite interesting on frames. If you ever see a really old frame with sort of slats of balsa wood instead of a solid back like this, you can get on the front of an image what almost looks like vertical burn marks, where the air has basically gone through and caused an air burn on the front of the image. That fortunately, the vast majority of the time, a good restorer can fix that, just with an alkaline bath or something, depending on whether the image is fugitive or not. But that's essentially caused by the back not being solid, and just air and pollutants and dust and things like that getting in there and flowing through and coming through the front of the image. Just finishing off these corners nice and neatly and bringing all that down, just making sure that all the tape is in there nicely so it doesn't peel off in areas later. Just turn it this way just to triple check that this is the top. With all of these bits, we always recommend that we put them between 1/4 and 1/3 of the way up the frame. That just allows it to sit nicely on the wall. Using a little bit of a thicker bit for these because it's a bit of a chunkier moulding. Obviously, the more metal you can get in something, the better. Obviously, without trying to go through the front. Let's check the front. There we go, some of the low stretch nylon cords. Very high breaking strain, these things. They've got, I can't remember, I think it's about 90 to 100 kilos of breaking strain on this middle one. So that's good, heavy grade stuff. It's low stretch as well. They used to call it non-stretch, but they did change it for low stretch now. So even though it is a very, very hard braid, over time gravity can make that pull up to there. So on something that's wide like this, we'd always recommend 2 hooks, and those 2 hooks there will create 2 fulcrum points. So it actually makes it easier to hang, but also they're going to have less drift upwards rather than one in the middle. So again, a longevity thing really. Ultimately, the string can always be undone and retied. So, you know, if you are finding that it's peaking across the top, just restring it. You know, put some more tension on it. The good thing about these cords being nylon, essentially they're not going to degrade over time. What can happen with metal wires and things like that is due to the malleability of metal, gravity itself can snap it. So very often when we do get things that come in that have been up on the walls for a number of years, it's because they've got metal wire on them instead of string like this. So from our point of view, metal wire is quite good in bringing us in new jobs. It's obviously from your point of view, not so much fun. So I'll just show you this quickly then. So fully finished job now, all checked and triple checked, and says triple checked. Let me just check this. This is why we check and check again. Type of thing that customer might never notice, but I have. I know it's there. So just a little bit of that sandwich tape sticking out. Easy fix. Easy to fix, difficult to get off your fingers. Anyway, so there we go. And let's move this up here. There we go. So there we go. So lovely Beatles, black and white photograph on everything ready to go. A little bit later, I've got a certificate of authenticity, which we'll put on the back of that. Well, I'm not going to do that tonight, just for time's sake. So that one done. So next we're going to come across onto this cross stitch. So it's a lovely Savannah cross stitch. Let me triple check I've got that shot. Yeah. So it's a lovely Savannah cross stitch of Annie's and things like that. Which is obviously just going to stretch out tonight. We're not going to make the mounts or anything like that. We always try to stretch it before we make the mounts and stuff. Again, not so much of an issue on this one. It's a nice solid cross stitch. So I mean, it's fully finished essentially. There's no gaps in the material. Some of them are designed in rather than obviously being done differently. So obviously this is a solid background cross stitch. So on the back, doesn't really matter about all these tails and things like that because they're not going to be visible. As a rule, we generally don't like to take off any form of stitching or anything like that across the back, just in case it's a link stitch. But you know, you can certainly take off the tails and things here because it's, as I mentioned before, a completely solid cross stitch. I'm not too worried about any of these coming stray in the back. So we can simply just frame it up. But obviously if this area here didn't have that background on it, then and just had a border, for example, then I'd worry about these black ones here sticking out of the tree because they would be visible through the material on the other side. But as I mentioned, because it's a solid one all the way through, it's not going to shine through. So it should be absolutely fine as it is. If not, then we'll just take it off and do it again. So with this one, we're going to just cut the board down with about 3 or 4 centimeters on either side, so about an inch and a quarter. So we're looking at about 38 by 47, so 18 and a half by 15. Got a handy bit of board here just ready to go. I'll just use my mount cutter to check which one's a bit square. So we know that one's square, that's good. Always good to have a square side. So I know this edge and this edge are square, so if I start off getting that square on that side, then I can follow it around, so it should be absolutely fine. So, get rid of any excess. So this sticky board just peels back like that. So this is so much easier and so much faster than the lacing, which you may have seen me start the other night, which is just so time consuming. It's basically one of the reasons why an awful lot of framers don't take on textiles, just because it's so time consuming. So now that I've got it roughly down on the board, you may see now what the issue is with cross links and things like that. You can probably just about see those threads that are visible now. Because we're going to nip into the image by a couple of stitches all the way around, none of this is going to be visible, so it doesn't really matter. Just get my set square. So as I said, I know this board and this corner here is square on it, so I'm going to use that as square to then get this base square, and then I'll continue that on the different sides all the way around. So I've got some lovely eddies here and a few giraffes in the background. Nice sort of sunset and savannah cross stitch. So someone's taken an awful lot of time and effort to make this really lovely and beautiful. But if you are wanting to save yourselves a few pennies at home, obviously if you don't want to pay a professional picture framer to stand here and painstakingly stretch this, then your best bet is to do that lacing technique, which I started to show you the other night. I'll go back over it again in a minute, just as a recap, because I did show it to you at the start of the stream. It's a very simple technique, but it just takes an awfully long time to do. And obviously, any professional worth their salt is going to charge their time for it. If they have to charge their time, and it takes a long time to do, then it's going to cost you a bit of money. So this stretching that we're doing here isn't the cheapest thing in the world to do either, because it's, again, time consuming and painstaking, and as I mentioned, not many other framers have the patience to do it, and they don't have our little techniques. You may or may not notice that that is not pristinely square, and what I mean by that is there's sort of a ½ millimeter variance all the way down, so there's a little bit of a wave. And essentially, when we get the mount over the top of it, we can tweak it back with the needle and just eke it out a little bit. But the vast majority of customers are really not going to notice a ½ mil difference between one stitch all the way down, unless it is something like an obvious border. You can spend absolutely hours and hours and hours on cross stitches, getting them perfectly straight and square, only to have, move it from, here to 30 centimeters that way, and textiles being textiles and having tensions in them, they can just shift, spoil your day if you're a perfectionist. So this one's got some really beautiful colours in it, some purples and some oranges and things like that. Obviously you've got the landscape of the trees, so it's picking up on some nice sort of colour options. You can frame it 101 different ways. With cross stitches, we always like to use 2 mounts to lift the threading as far away from the electrostatics as possible, because obviously threads can pull up if they're loose inside in the glass. And so we'll put a nice neutral mount over the top of it, and then we'll pick out one of the colours underneath. So usually we'd start off with a cream or a white or something like that, and then pick up on one of the major colours in there. So this particular customer has chosen the lovely sepia and the elephant, so a nice sort of warming cream over the top, and then underneath a little slither of this warming sepia, which is really, it's going to be a really nice, simple traditional finish. If you wanted to go crazy, you can put a black on the outside to pop the colours out, and then purples and oranges to pick up on the sunset. Again, you could keep it traditional with a nice green in there. You could even use the green with the sepia underneath. Certainly there's plenty of creams and ivory colours in there. Great to pick up on. You've got some browns obviously in the giraffe rather than sepias. But again, the blacks and purples and oranges and things like that are going to make it into a really contemporary, modern look as well. So there's quite a bit of tension in this already from the two sides. So as you can see, I'm having to put my nail in quite close to the edge just to try and get it to stick down a little bit. So we're getting this as square as physically possible rather than pure square. So, as I mentioned before, with any form of textile, there's always a bit of give in it. it's virtually impossible to get them laser flat. You know, if you ever wanted to get them laser flat, then lacing is the technique to go with, because you can get obviously a tight lace on it. But even with that, it can be quite difficult and tweaky. You have to spend a lot of time. In fact, one of our only ever complaints about our stretching before was that customer lost a competition because one of our stitches was 0.5 millimetre out. But if you were going to go into a competition, we'd always recommend that you stretch it yourself anyway. I kind of feel there's a bit of a cheat, actually, getting someone to stretch something for a competition. But, we weren't made aware of it until after the competition. Anyway, I think losing second place to the competition because your stitching was 0.5 mil out isn't that big of an issue. And certainly the customer didn't pick it up when she, didn't pick up on it when she collected it. So if someone is looking at your cross stitch from a judging point of view, they're obviously going to look at it with a magnifying glass from pretty darn close. I mean, the vast majority of customers, when they're looking at an image, or anybody, when they're looking at an image, they don't look at an image here. You know, they look at an image from back here. So, you know, like all things in life, we will always try and get precision and make sure it's perfect and pristine and as square as possible. But you know, there's only so many times that you can go round and round and round trying to get perfection. You know, half of our job really as picture framers is trying to manage people's expectation. I mean, as you can clearly see, I'm going round and round and round and doing this line again and again and again, and it's wanting to move back and maneuver itself and essentially not stay in the position that I'm physically putting it in. So, you know, if someone is physically putting something in a position and it's working against you, then there is a potential for that to fail at any stage, you know. It's the sheer nature of them. What if I just make that a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm doing fast? Let's try to get full screen for a bit. Let's do that. There we go. Right, so you should be able to see the last edge when I do this. So I've literally left it for 2 seconds. So it was in a nice straight line, as you can see with that down the side. This is warped again. All I do when I do this basically is I follow a stitch line all the way down this. All the way down here. Try and get that activated. So, last line to do. As I said, what we'll do is, we'll, now that we've basically got it all stretched out, is we'll do the mount another day, but it allows us to calculate the mount now within a few millimeters of approximation, and we'll use that mount as a square because it's a little bit easier than a set square, and then we can just tweak it outside of the mount visible area outside of the aperture area, just to tweak it all in line. But obviously, good stretching in the first place helps you helps with time management later on. So again, just following that line down the set square, you can already see from where I've left that this is pulling away. You know, there are people out there would leave, leave a bit of material a little bit looser, but obviously we're trying to get tension on it, so that tension is going to really make this nice and flat for many years to come. And that's what we're looking for, really, that longevity of it all. So, you know, the three major things in framing are obviously display, longevity, and protection. And that's part of the protection, really, is keeping it on this board so that it doesn't have to be re-stretched later. It doesn't have to be manhandled, and it can be up on display for many years to come. Part of that protection is that we use a conservation grade board underneath to stop any yellowing or acid coming through and making the actual materials brittle. One of our biggest issues, if we have an old sampler that comes in, is actually the brittle nature of the material that it's been made on. And, you know, sometimes we have to keep it a little bit loose. Because obviously we're worried about putting tension into an old material. So, you know, again, that's part of that managing expectations thing. You know, if a customer brings in a very, very old sampler, then we're not going to be able to, keep it laser pristine as it would have been brand new. There we go. So I always get my nail in just to make sure all the stitches are grabbed hold of. There we go. That one's very roughly stretched. So that one can now be measured. Put it away safely for now, and essentially when we've made the frame, so when we make the mount, we can obviously check the square against it and then tweak out in the non-aperture area any stitches which are, you know, are sort of really loose. So let's just pull this back up. So the next thing I'm going to come on to is some photographs. So there's a few that we've printed earlier. All of these are obviously going to be laid down on the board, so flattened down. And that flattening process is good for a number of reasons. So heat, humidity, and change in pressure can get in and basically expand and contract a piece of paper. You've also got things like the natural curl of the paper, like this. So we obviously want to get that nice and flat. Obviously these are all open edition prints that we've sorted out in-house. So they're you know, very simple. And with that we'll just trim off, leaving a little bit of a white border in between each of them, and then we'll just lay them down nicely onto a board. A better pair of scissors. There we go. It's a better pair of scissors. So there is a guillotine beside me, which would be much quicker. But anyway, so we printed these all off on a high grade glossy photograph. Okay, save that. High grade glossy photograph paper on a Giclée printer. So what a Giclée printer does is it means you can get really quite tight in and some beautiful colours. So if you can see some lovely penguins, so you can see all the feathers on it. You know, it's really beautiful. You can get in nice and tight and very close on things. So I'll trim this down on the table. Actually, it's a bit quicker. Yeah, thanks. I'll put a board underneath it. So because we're laying these down, obviously we're again with these we're going to be doing it all in house. So there's going to be mounts over the top. So we're not too worried about the bit that's not going to be visible being square. You know, it's just for a time-saving point of view, really. If obviously we're going to give the customers these photographs without being permanently bonded down or outside of a mount, then we want to be you know, a lot more precious in terms of the border widths and that sort of thing. These photographs are all ever so slightly different sized. They're primed for a standard size, but obviously when someone brings them into you, you know, potentially they've taken it on a different camera with a different aspect ratio or whatever, so you've got to print off the item as best as possible without changing that ratio, but still being able to fit it into that standard aperture. So with all of these, I'm just trying to avoid my fingers getting anywhere near the prints. Fingers and photographs really don't mix. There's acid in your fingertips. So literally, if you put your finger onto a photograph, you know, you can leave your fingerprint behind, and it can acid etch into the photograph itself, which should A, spoil the enjoyment of the customer, and B, B, the coppers can track you down. So I'm only leaving about 1 centimetre of white around the outside of it. Essentially, obviously, the bonds that we're going to use in terms of the base layer can actually attach to the image as well, attach the mounts as well, which is quite useful. So I'm using a baseboard here to cut into for 2 reasons. One, I don't want this bit of carpet underneath sliced open. And B, it just gives a bit of firmness to put the blade into. Gives you a little bit more control. Shouldn't be on anymore, compressor. Turn it off. Fussy old beggar. There we go. Shush. Right. So you've got some beautiful different types of penguins here. Customer was telling me all about the difference between Humboldts and chin straps and rock hoppers and all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So he's got himself a lovely passion, really. I mean, they are beautiful birds. Not sure I want to venture down and see them in the wild. It's a bit too chilly for me. Quite a nice display at the local zoo, I think. That'll do me. Although my memories of the local zoo is that penguins themselves are quite smelly. A lovely couple of albatrosses in here as well. And some sand dunes. Get an awful lot of these sort of feather pictures come back from South America, sort of feathers and butterfly wings. They're very fantastically beautiful. I think feathers I could cope with a little bit more, but the bird's feathers, I can cope with a little bit more because obviously there's natural shedding, but the butterfly wings is always a little bit of a worry that they've gone out and caught them. It's, you know what these touristy things are like. You never know whether they've been farmed or whether they've gone out and captured them. And obviously they produce an awful lot of them. If they produce an awful lot of them, that means that an awful lot of butterflies have disappeared. Hopefully it's an abundant resource, but you never know with these things. That's one of the more friendly animal products we get in from time to time. The ones that I'm a little less certain are the things like the photographs or pictures made from animal dung, like elephant dung or something. It doesn't really smack me as enjoyable for a framer to frame. Let's do a number of those. At least two. So maybe you guys can tell me what the worst animal-related product you've ever had to deal with was. Occasionally you get skulls and things like that in as well, which people have collected from the moors or whatever. It's always interesting. In fact, there's a lady taxidermist that's linked into us on Instagram, which you can go and check out. Actually, it's one of our frames. I think she did. She used one of our frames and did an animal skull depicting the scream by that Norwegian artist whose name escapes me for the minute. That's always worthwhile going and have a look at. I think another one she used a stuffed raven on. We've got some lovely eclipses and the northern lights in this one, as well as some icebergs and some icebreakers. You know, a picture doesn't always have to be a picture. You know, it can be something that you can create a storyboard from. Don't have to have individual frames. You can do multi-apertures, so you know, having more than one picture in a frame. Family life and things like that, you know, it's always good. Family holidays, or you know, there's multitudes of different ideas out there. There are a few ones in here which are a little bit more faded. Just you know, it's amazing how the light on different days can really affect things. You know, this chap's obviously got a very decent camera, so on some of them which are, you know, really quite close in, you know, high grade photographs, and some of them are obviously on a murky day where the atmospherics get in the way. Spoil them a little bit. There's the obvious other issue in terms of picture framing is getting the image from your lovely 4K printer, 4K monitor, onto a admittedly high grade photographic paper, but we're restricted from having hundreds and thousands of I don't know what you call them with a monitor. Anyway, the brightness is nits, isn't it? I think it's nits. Hundreds and thousands of nits on a 4K monitor to you know, obviously just the combinations you can get from 8 different coloured inks. I mean, it's a good approximation from 3 or 4 foot away, but if you were to hold it up next to, you know, your image right next to the 4K monitor, it's never going to look the same. You know, as much as you can spend on color adjustments and things like that, which I do have. I've got one of those spider things. It still looks ever so slightly different. Again, it's a case of managing the customer's expectations. The vast majority of customers know that there's no way on earth that a picture that will look good, that's backlit on a 4K monitor, is going to look as good as it is on a physical piece of paper. If you want it to look that good constantly with an illumination behind it of light, then essentially you need to frame a 4K monitor. So particularly the ice on this icebreaker has turned a little bit grayer than it is on the monitor, which is a bit disappointing. The one thing I would say, the difference between the monitor and the photograph is that this is clearly obviously been taken from a helicopter. Nobody just floats up. So there's a little bit of a window glare across there, which is actually hidden a little bit more by the photograph than it was by the monitor. So this is the last sheet of these, you'll be pleased to know, and we'll crack on with getting these boards flattened down. We're actually going to use the same board that we used on the cross stitch, so that lovely conservation grade. No, not sorry. We're going to use a photo fix board. So it's a board that's designed primarily for fixing photographs down. It's a 5mm foam board. Again, got a nice bit of sticky for the photographs themselves. That's the coldest looking of them all to me. Chap was saying this was in the middle of high summer. If the penguins are looking that cold in high summer, I don't want to be there during the winter, that's for sure. 4 more to go, and then we shall have a look at the boards themselves. In the meantime, you can have a look at some Happy Feet. They're cute little things, aren't they? The penguins clambering over the rocks, and on to the last one. It's quite funny actually. Like all photographers and all artists in the world, this rather lovely image of a penguin family together, and all the customer can talk about is that he's cropped the top of this penguin's head here. Call it Daddy Penguin as he's taller than the other one. But it's just a really lovely balanced shot. So it's caught the light really balancing off call it Mummy's tummy and Daddy's feathers, and obviously it's got a lovely little chick in between, squawking his head out for some food. It's not unlike everything in my house. Have a quick little swig. You have a few of these photo fix boards out, ready to go. It's quite useful to show you. So it's just a 5mm foam board with a stickiness on top of it. Peel this back and obviously lay down the image nicely. Because it is a foam board. It's inert, so it doesn't have any acid in it. We'll just line up a couple of these and just see which was the best method forward. The joy of this is it's got some lines in it, so I can work out how many of these boards I need. So yeah, we'll just get the 3 out of it. That's nice efficient use of it anyway. Just going to change the blade on this. Obviously you need nice sharp blade for nice sharp edges. So flip the blade around actually. So let's grab our first one. Let's check and make sure there's no dust and bits and bobs in behind. Peel that back, keep that to the side. So start in the middle and lay it down gently. Without getting my hands anywhere near it, just lay the piece back down. Just getting any air bubbles out from underneath it. This is not a repositionable board, so you don't get it wrong. You get it right first time. Which is also one of the reasons why with any form of antique you don't ever get it, you don't ever do any form of flattening process to it, just in case. It's one of the best crop for that. There, actually, let's go. So that one's all ready to be trimmed off then. We'll leave that to the side. We'll trim off 3 at a time. Just do the next one quickly. You can try this and do this at home. You may be able to get some photo fix boards from, you know, from your local art supplier, but they aren't the cheapest boards in the world, the good grade ones. And I'd always recommend that you get an awful lot more than you need and print the image off a few more times than you need, because it's so easy to get it wrong. I'm just using the studio light here just to check for any bubbles or nicks or anything like that. So that's the reason for doing that. Obviously you don't want any air bubbles, because air bubbles, they show up. Especially with glossy photographs like this, they have a tendency to catch the light certain times of the day. Now you also note with the palm of my hands, I'm just using the flat bit of my hand and starting in the middle and working my way out just to make sure that there isn't any air bubbles or anything like that at all. Just check that under the lights. That looks all good to me. Just centralise this character in a nice place. Lay it down. This little mark here will come off with just a rubber. So I'm not concerned about that at all, but that will be done in the bunging, in the fitting process, if you like. We call it bunging in, just because we're characters. So the actual laying down of it is a fairly quick process. It's all the other stuff around it that takes a while, and you know, sheer cost of these boards aren't cheap. You can go to printers and things like that and get something called Fomex, which is a similar sort of product, but the photo fix that we use is inert foam. A good seal on it, essentially. Photo fix is, you know, it's a better quality Fomex, essentially. It's also less likely to peel over the years. I mean, Fomex and things like that, you know, it's a pretty good fix, but it's primarily designed for things like exhibitions and stuff, so it tends to be sort of temporary usage rather than permanent uses, which is what we're using this for. Obviously, someone not so familiar with a blade, I'd always recommend that you use a good quality steel rule. I've got one just over there, but yeah. Famous last words. I'm fairly confident with this blade. Not only am I confident with the blade, but obviously, you know, I've got all the ability to reprint these if I do ever go wrong with them. So everything's got a big gathering of people just outside the shop for some reason. Checking what's going on. Some sort of Christmas party thing going on. Geniuses. So I know I can get three 3 out of there, but I'll probably get a couple more out actually with so yeah, I'd probably get 5 out of there if I did it that way around. Friday night, eh? Friday night. The joys of Friday night stream. I think just because I got these Muppets outside screaming, I'm going to end it there. So, thanks a lot, guys.